You are tuned in to the Empowerment Hour podcast, your digital global classroom where individuals across all ages, backgrounds, and career levels tune in for guidance and motivation to live life on their own terms. It's where inspiring thought leaders, modern-day influencers, and social game changers come to discuss their own personal journeys and have real conversations about the journey to success. I am your host, Nancy Ruffin, and every week I bring you raw and unfiltered conversations about the obstacles we all encounter, the times we felt like giving up, and the things that keep us forging forward. It's where passion and purpose intersect. So if you're ready to start living on purpose, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Empowerment Hour podcast. I'm grateful that you have decided to tune in and join me and rock with me for the 99th episode of the podcast. I am your host, Nancy Ruffin, and you know what we do here every week? I share my stories. Sometimes I have guests who share their own stories, and the goal really is to have genuine, honest, authentic conversations about our personal journeys to success, the challenges and obstacles we encounter on that journey, and how we are able to navigate through that so that we can really attain that level of success that we aspire to for ourselves. Understanding that success is subjective, guys, right? What I deem to be successful may not be what you deem to be successful. So we have to be very clear on how we define success for ourselves and not really get caught up in other people's perception of success. And that's what I really wanted to talk about on this week's episode, because I think that we have become a society who really gives a lot of weight to what we see on our phone screens, what we see on TV, what we see come across, the media. We are so addicted to the perception of perfection that oftentimes we can lose ourselves in that, and it can be very damaging to our self-image, our self-esteem, our self-confidence if we find ourselves constantly comparing ourselves to what somebody else is doing, to the opportunities that someone else might be getting. And it's so different now because we have social media. We have all of these different platforms where it appears as if everyone is blasting and posting their successes, right? And what we don't always see are the failures or the rejections or the many times where they may not know how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage or get food on the table, right? No one hardly ever posts any of those things. And even myself, with as much as I share with you all on the podcast, in my books, on my social media, there is still a lot that I don't share because as someone who is in the public eye, someone who is in the media, there are things that I hold very sacred. One of those things is my marriage. And I have to kind of thank my husband for that too, because he does not subscribe to my shenanigans. And you guys can, you can see that on the few times that I do kind of share him on my social media. I try to post him on Instagram. He is not about that social media life, and he's very private. And so I really try to respect his boundaries, and I also I do respect our marriage in that you're never going to see me posting about an argument or disagreements or when we're fighting or when things may be rocky or shaky. Now, what I will do is I will talk about those moments after we have dealt with them, right? After they have passed, after we have healed from the argument or the issue. And I'm not saying that like we argue today and then we're good by next week and I want to talk about it. No, I mean, this is years, right? I will talk to you today about something that we went through years ago and how we overcame that, because it's important for me to keep that sacred. Everyone does not deserve open access to you, even though we preach about being authentic, even though we're talking about the importance of being honest and showing our true selves and giving, our viewers and our supporters behind the scenes access to our lives. That doesn't mean you have to give them all access to your lives. And I think that sometimes what we see on social media can be very misleading and very confusing, because you can see the woman who appears to have it all, right? She may have the successful career. She may have the designer bags and the designer shoes and the picture perfect family. But then there's a whole list of other things that may be happening behind the scenes that you don't see, that you don't know about. She might be involved in an abusive relationship, right? And it may not be physical, but it can be verbal. It can be emotional. Maybe she is with a man who's super controlling and doesn't really allow her to truly be who she is, right? She might need to ask permission to do certain things. She might be dealing with a child who's suffering from some kind of illness that we may not be aware of, right? We don't know what she has had to go through in her career or on her own journey to get to where she is right now. And oftentimes people are not sharing those things because they are not picture perfect, right? And so it also paints a different picture of them. And I share this because I know, even for myself, as confident as I am, there are times where I will look, at other women who are doing very similar work, that I am doing, and I tend to compare myself to them. And I look at what they're doing. I look at the opportunities that they're getting. I look at the people who they're connecting with. And I may not be there yet, right? And what I think I've learned to do, or what I've realized that I need to do, is that we all arrive at our destinations at our own time. Right? So not saying that I won't ever get to where that other woman is. I might even surpass her, but my time isn't now, right? My time may be the season of harvest, right? This is the time where I have to be perfecting my work, my skills. Maybe there are lessons that I still need to learn, so that when I get there, I can be my best self, and I can I can provide the best help that I can to those of you that I'm guiding, that I'm leading, those of you who turn to me for inspiration and motivation, right? We all go through our own seasons of harvest, and being able to recognize that is so critical to our mental health, for one, and to our self-esteem. Because we are all equipped with special gifts and talents that no one else has. So even if there's someone else that is doing the same exact thing that you are doing, understand that they could never do it or deliver it the same way that you can. They just can't. You are an individual. You are unique. God has instilled in you a talent that no one else has. And so when we're looking at these pictures of perfection, whether it's on Instagram or on Snapchat or Facebook or YouTube or whatever is our choice of social media platform, it's really important that we don't lose ourselves in what we're seeing on our news feeds. Last week I had an opportunity to collaborate with two women who I absolutely love, adore, and respect. And for all intents and purposes, we do a lot of the same work. We are all in the, industry of helping others, of healing, of nurture, of self-love, right? We all do the same thing and we do it in different ways. Cynthia is a licensed therapist, right? So she has a different skill set. She has a different level of training that I don't have. I am not a therapist. I don't promote myself as a therapist. And when I do my coaching sessions with my clients, if I recognize that there is a need for therapy, I am not the one who is going to try to guide them through that process. One, because I don't know how. And two, it's not my lane. And three, I never want to guide someone in the wrong direction. And so when I recognize that, I immediately refer them to Cynthia, right? And I will tell them, I think that you need to speak with someone. This is something that I am not equipped to guide you in. And so I refer them out. The same thing with Stephanie, the life architect. I think she is phenomenal at what she does. And her and I do a lot of the same work, but our deliveries are different, right? And not to say that one is better than the other, but she does her thing her way. I do my thing my way. And we're each going to attract our own tribe, right? I'm going to attract the women that need to hear the message the way I deliver it. And she's going to attract the women that need to hear the message the way she delivers it. And then there's a special group in the middle of that will relate to both the way I deliver the message and the way that she delivers the message. But even with that, right, I still find myself at times questioning, when is it going to be my time? And when am I going to be seen? And when am I going to be noticed on this grand scale? And when I do that, I also recognize that that's my ego talking, right? As much as I talk about doing God's work and really allowing him to use me as his instrument, as his vessel to touch the people that he wants me to touch, to deliver the messages that he wants me to deliver, there's still a part of me that is very selfish and egocentric. And I need to step out of that and understand that as long as God is recognizing me, right? That's all that matters, because he is the ultimate creator. He is the one that is going to elevate me farther than I can ever imagine. And so for me to even put that idea on to someone else, for me to seek that validation from someone other than God, that right there always puts me in check real quick. But you know what? I'm human. And I'm flawed, and I'm still going through my own process, right? So not saying, again, I am not perfect. I don't want any of you to look at me in that light, because I am a human being just like you. I make bad decisions sometimes. Sometimes I doubt myself. Sometimes I scream and yell at my kids, and then I feel bad afterwards, and I question my ability as a mother, and so these are all very normal human things. And I really want you all this week to kind of take a step back and see how you apply that in your own lives. How are you comparing yourselves to other people? Where does that stem from? Where is it coming from? Why do you do that? Right? And because the first step of taking any corrective action and any of the things that we want to change in our lives is really being aware, being aware of the behaviors, being aware of the patterns, being aware of the triggers and the things that cause us to act and react in certain ways. I think about how far I've come in my journey, and I've talked about this before. I've talked about it on the podcast and in my events, and never in a million years would I had imagined that I would be doing any of the stuff that I'm doing today. This podcast was never a dream of mine. It was never an ambition that I had. Being in the media, being in the public eye, never, ever, ever a dream for me, right? And so the fact that I am doing this now, the fact that I love it and that I'm so involved and committed to doing this work, for me is proof that God has a bigger plan for my life, a bigger plan than I even imagined, because all I've ever wanted to do from the moment I realized I could read and write was be a writer. I've always loved writing. It's what I've done since I was a little girl. And yet, all of these other things have come out of my desire to share my voice and share my stories. And the podcast is just an extension of that. And I say all that to say that my journey to where I am today has not been easy. And for those of you who may just be following me now, who may not have the history, about my past and about all of the things that I've gone through, not easy. There was a time where I was very, I don't know if depressed is the right word, because I don't want to take away from someone who truly suffers from depression, but I was not happy with myself. I was really in a really bad place. I was just sad and angry all the time. I felt like I was alone. And, I would do things that dishonored me, my body, my spirit, God. I just didn't care. Like, I was just living life young, wild, and free, right? And at the time, I thought I was having a great time. I thought I was having fun. And I guess at the moment, it was fun. But then something happens when you start getting older and you start looking at your life in the direction that it's going, and you realize, you know what, I don't want to spend the rest of my life partying in clubs every single weekend, popping bottles, getting drunk, having hangovers, sleeping your life away the next day because you're just so hung over from the night before. And even though I was doing all that, I was still kind of focused. I knew that I was still in school, and I knew that I didn't want to end up a loser. But the things that I was doing was not aligned with the things that I had convinced myself that I wanted to do. And as a result of that, I suffered a lot in my younger years. Like, my 20s and my 30s were a time of suffering and learning and just really trying to get my life together. I got married super young. I met my husband when I was 20 years old. We would go out and he would try to take me to clubs, and I couldn't even get in, to certain bars because I wasn't 21 yet. And by the time I was 23, we were already married. Or was it 24? I think it was 24. Okay, so by the time I was 24, we were already married. Now, mind you, here I am, a young girl, really, for all intents and purposes. I was very immature 24-year-old. I had never lived on my own. I had always lived with my parents. I had never supported myself, even though I had a job and I was paying my own car insurance. That was the only bill I had, and my cell phone bill. But other than that, my parents took care of me, right? They provided the roof over my head, food. My dad paid my car note. He paid my credit card bills. Super spoiled. and had no freaking clue what it meant to be a wife. But I get married, and now the whole dynamic changes, because now my daddy's not paying. He's not footing the bill. I gotta pay for rent, gotta pay for my credit card bills, while I'm simultaneously trying to figure out what the heck it means to be a wife, right? And then I didn't have the best example of what a marriage should look like, because my parents' marriage was rocky as all hell, for lack of a better word. And it was not healthy either back then. And so I carried a lot of what I saw in my parents' marriage into my own marriage, which resulted in a big hot mess of a relationship, because I was battling what it meant to be a wife from what I had learned and seen, with also being this very independent young woman who was educated, who had her own job, who never really had to depend on a man other than my dad for anything. So being in that relationship with my husband was really difficult, and we struggled so much in the early years of our relationship. Then amidst all of that, he ends up getting diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I've said this story in the past, I've written about it, but I will tell you that a life-threatening disease like cancer really puts things into perspective real quick for you, right? So you start to realize that all of the nonsense that you would argue about before, all of the different disagreements that you would have, really became irrelevant when the person that you love is fighting for their lives. And so that diagnosis, I think, was the beginning of him and I getting our shit together with regard to our marriage. And not that we hadn't tried before that, because I will tell you that we went to marriage counseling, we went to counseling in our church. Like, we really fought for the relationship. Like, we didn't just have these issues and gave up on each other and said we're kind of going our separate ways, let's get divorced. Like, it was never that. We really tried and we stuck together. Then he gets diagnosed with cancer. Go figure. I always say that God has a funny way of really making you realize what's important in life. But we were young, right? And we were stupid. So, through God's grace, he beats the cancer, and he has been in remission for over 15 years. Amen. Hallelujah. But, he beats the cancer back then. A couple of years later, we're back to our old shenanigans, right? Now, because he's healthy, and, he's healthy, he knows he's healthy, I know he's healthy, we begin to take each other for granted again. And so we're back to the arguing, the disagreements, the not getting along, all this stuff. My nieces get baptized. My sister has a huge party for them. Everyone is having a great old time. And, we're eating and drinking and just having fun. Back then, I was very irresponsible, as was my husband. And he decided to drive, despite the fact that he had been drinking and we were both drunk. And so drinking, when it came to us, was never a good thing, because we would always end up arguing. And so it was no different that day of my niece's baptism. We get into this huge argument. Don't even remember what the argument was about, but we're arguing. He's drunk. We're driving down the Bronx River Parkway. Next thing I know, wham, bam, car accident. We got hit by this huge Mack truck. Our car got totaled. My husband broke his hip. He fractured his hand. He could not walk. By the grace of God, I walked out of that accident with barely a scratch. Okay, my husband had to endure hip surgery. Years after that, he had to have hip replacement. He had to have surgery on his hands. I mean, it was just another thing where I felt God was trying to show us and tell us something. And we ignored the first sign of the cancer. We took that for granted. And now he was like, all right, I'm going to show you now really what I was trying to teach you, to see if you guys get it. And so we got it, because then not 1 week to the day of that accident, maybe it was 2 weeks, but it was like right after that, my parents get into a bad accident driving to Florida. This was years ago when they first moved to Florida. They first purchased their house. They were driving to Florida. They had drove up for my niece's baptism, and then we're driving back down, and it was my mom, my dad, one of my uncles, and one of my aunts. May she rest in peace. She died as a result of that car accident that they had. And so when I think about that moment, getting that phone call, I was home. I had just gotten home from taking Lamar to rehab because he had the surgery in his hip and he had to do rehab in order to to learn how to walk again. And I get home and my mom is on the other line, like barely audible. I couldn't understand what she was saying, through sobs and tears, telling me that she had been in an accident, that they all had got ejected out of the vehicle, that she didn't know where my father was. And I'm thinking about it and I'm getting emotional. This happened in Delaware, so imagine. Now I can't even get to them immediately. I have to drive a few hours to get there. Driving with my husband, who's still convalescing. He was in a walker. He could barely walk, but he wanted to be there with me and for me. And so he took the ride with me, to Delaware, to Christiana Memorial Center, I believe is the hospital. One of the best facilities ever. And if I ever come into large amount of money, I am going to donate so much to that hospital for the kind of treatment that they gave my family while they were there. But I remember arriving at the hospital, by the grace of God as well, my mother walked out of that accident with barely a scratch. She was the only one who was not physically injured. My uncle ended up breaking his leg. My father had severe injury to his neck, spine, back, his hand. He had like broken fingers or something. He had to wear this like metal contraption on his head for 6 months. It was horrible, 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 horrible. And I remember during that same time, my aunt, was in ICU, and she was the only one that didn't get ejected out of the car. I don't know, there was something with the seatbelt. I guess, it kept her in, but because she was driving and it kept her in, when the car, I guess, was spinning or turning around, it really injured her. And she ended up dying a few days later from the injuries that she sustained from the car accident. And I can't even begin to explain the importance of this woman in my life. First of all, she was my dad's sister, and she was my aunt, but she was also my godmother. And she was always the woman that I aspired to be like when I grew up. She was just super successful. She had 2 master's degrees. She was like a head administrator at the hospital. I mean, I modeled my entire career after her because I wanted to walk in her footsteps. So when she passed, it was really devastating to our family. And when I think about that moment in time and you realize that how precious life is, right? And how we take life for granted. We take our loved ones for granted. 1 minute they can be here and 1 minute they're not. That event, coupled with the accident that my husband and I had a couple of weeks prior, was what really started to put things into perspective for me. And I was like, you know what? We have to stop this nonsense. And I told my husband, I was like, if we're going to be together, we're going to be together. We're going to have to let all the shit, leave it in the past, whatever issues we have, whatever we've been carrying with ourselves all this time. We either if we're going to stay together, we have to let it go. If we can't let it go, then we need to part ways because life is too short to be living like this. And from that moment on, we let shit go. And we really worked on creating a new relationship for ourselves. And then amidst all of that, we decided that we had wanted to purchase a house. And I remember I was going for my master's degree at that time. I had tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And when we went to apply for our mortgage, we had a really hard time getting a mortgage because I had so much student loan debt. And I remember our mortgage broker telling us, well, we eventually got approved for the mortgage, but he said, and I won't ever forget, he told us that we wouldn't be able to afford a house, that we would foreclose on it eventually because we couldn't afford to make our mortgage payments. And I will tell you that it has been 12 years since I purchased my house, and we have never missed a mortgage payment. And I wish I could find out how that mortgage broker was or is, so I can let him know you were wrong, buddy. But I share all this to say that no one's life is perfect, even if what they post online seems to be perfect, even if all you see is their best moments. Understand that behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that you are not seeing, that you are not privy of. You have no idea how many times they are on their knees praying to God, to get them out of their storm, or not to forsake them, or to heal their loved one, or to bless their finances. Everyone goes through their own trials and tribulations. I remember when I had my miscarriage right before my oldest daughter. That was for me probably the most painful, difficult experience that I have personally felt. And I remember, as much as I love God, as much as I trust God, as strong as my faith in God is today, back then, all I could do was curse him. All I could do was damn him and wonder why he was forsaking me, why he would bless me with the thing that I wanted the most and then rip it out of my arms. And I remember I would curse every woman that had a child. I couldn't be happy for anyone who told me that they were pregnant. I resented my sister, for having her kids, and she wasn't living what I felt in my crazy perception wasn't the ideal life. Here she was, a single mother of 2 girls. She hadn't finished college. When she got pregnant with my first niece, she was living at home with my parents. I was feeling all of these different emotions, and I was like, here I am, a college graduate. I got married. I own my own house. On paper, I look really great, and you don't bless me with a child. Right? Yet there's crackheads out there. There's women who beat their children. There's people who murder their kids. Those are the women you give children to. It was a really dark period for me, and I suffered a lot. But then once I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the miscarriage, and I started to regain my faith back, I realized that suffering is a part of life. Right? Suffering is something that we're all going to encounter because that is how God is testing our faith in him. And when we think about our own suffering and when we ask God, why me? Let us remind ourselves that the person who has suffered the greatest in our history is Jesus. No one has suffered more than Jesus, right? No one has suffered more than he has, or more than he did when he was nailed on that cross, right? And so, the Bible says that the suffering is all a part of the work that God has given us, right? Christ, who suffered for us, right? Jesus being nailed on that cross suffered for us so that we could have eternal life. That is our example. And so if Jesus suffered, who are we to think that we are not going to suffer at some point in this life? Right? But what we can't lose sight of and what we can't let go of is faith and hope and what awaits us after the suffering, right? Because God doesn't say that we're not going to suffer, but what he's saying is that he is going to carry us through the suffering, to that paradise, to where we ultimately want to be, to that dream that we have for ourselves. Because your testimony is going to be in that test, right? In that moment of suffering. And once you get out of that, once you make it through, once you evolve from that victoriously, that is going to be your testimony of how God got you through. Your message is going to be in that mess that you don't even see a way out of right now, right? You have to go through it in order to get to where you want to go or where you ultimately see yourself at. So understand that perception of perfection is not real. All of those picture perfect postings that you're seeing, every single one of those people have suffered. You just don't know what kind of suffering they've had to endure to get to where they are. And so, in an effort to not preach to you today, I am going to leave you with that. I just want you to be a little kinder to yourself. I want you to not be so hard on yourself. I want you to allow yourself to live in this moment and understand that your time is coming. Stop comparing yourself to the next person. They cannot be you even on your worst day. All right, there's only one you, and God was very intentional when he created you. So until next time, mi gente, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and go out there and crush those goals.